I'm Ellen McElderry with Community Counseling, and I am just really excited to have the opportunity to speak about the unethical behaviors in the workplace. I've had the opportunity to work for a variety of different organizations, and through those experiences and my research, been able to really learn a lot about unethical behaviors, how you identify them, and then what the heck do you do with them? And so that's what we're here for today, just to have a very candid, casual conversation, some education. So please put any questions, comments in the chat. We'll get to those. And really thank you for your engagement in this activity today. And Danielle.
Danielle Garrison, supervisor over here at Community Counseling as well. And I have been in several organizations, just having the opportunity to observe and kind of experience different ways that professionals interact, both ethical and perhaps unethical. I also have an opportunity to be an adjunct professor at Bellevue University. I teach several courses, but one of the courses that I teach is ethics in the community counseling, master's in community counseling. So kind of down my avenue, so to speak. So we'll kind of be discussing that and how that applies in the professional workplace.
Great. So just to let you know where we are coming from, if you're not familiar with the community counseling program, it is an outpatient mental health clinic, if you will. But where our program is different is that instead of having all of our clients come to our main office off 90th and Center, we actually go out into the community to remove barriers and make access to care easier. So we are in neighborhood churches. We have agreements with Omaha Public Schools, Metro Community colleges, and we're out there on their landscape, if you will, so people can easily walk or take buses to get to access our services. I share this with you because some of the population that we are serving and our sister department, the Employee Assistance Program, they receive clients who are experiencing unethical behaviors in the workplace. And it's impacting not only their work life, but also their personal life. So this goes to show you that it's an issue, but there's resources to help you should you be in need. So just to let you know, we are here for you, whether it's the community counseling program or Methodist Employee Assistance Program. These are some resources that you might find really handy. So, all right, so let's jump into this. Everybody on this call made a decision at some point in their life to enter the helping industry, to take this as a job. Why? For the glitz, the glam, the money, the fame, the fortune? Probably not. Let's be honest. It's because we like to help people. We want to make a difference. Sure, there's lots of other motivating factors, but simply put, it's usually because we want to help people, which is fantastic. And all the training and education and degrees and certifications you go through, we'll spend a lot of time and energy talking to you about the care for your patients, for your clients, the consumers, those that we are serving. But often there's not a lot of spotlight put on the care that we need to give to one another, our coworkers, our colleagues, and we kind of lose sight of that. And that's how this unethical behavior in the workplace starts. Also, just for terminology's sake, when I'm talking about unethical behaviors, you're also going to hear terminologies like unprofessional behavior, bullying, harassment, lateral violence, exclusion, those types of behaviors. It's all the same thing, just different terminology. So, and they come in a variety of forms, and we'll be talking about that. So it's just really important that we understand that when it comes to unethical behaviors, it's something that happens as a result of us forgetting to be mindful of our relationships and interactions with peers, coworkers, colleagues, and things of that nature. And I don't know if anybody remembers, but once upon a time, when you first probably became licensed or certified or started working in the field, there was a little thing that probably went through a chapter, maybe a quiz in college called Code of Ethics, right? Not something we probably go back and read on a regular basis. But it is interesting if you ever want to take a moment to ground yourself and self-reflect, pull up your code of ethics and take a look at it. It's kind of a brief little way to inspire you and remind you of why you entered this field in the first place, but also what was the commitment and the responsibilities we accepted when we made the decision to enter this field. It is actually all laid out quite nicely in the Code of Ethics. So I'm just curious if anybody wants to put in the chat, has anybody ever seen or thought of where or what their Code of Ethics has to say about unethical behaviors in the workplace? My apologies, I'm just seeing now in the chat that some people cannot hear. Okay, but some people obviously can hear because now I'm seeing responses in the chat, so thank you. Okay, so some people are saying that in their code of ethics, they've seen where unethical behavior should not be tolerated. Absolutely, Kim, thank you. Yes, Alexis, unethical behavior can come from patients and your coworkers. Absolutely. I admit, when I first became licensed, I don't recall them talking about unethical behaviors in the workplace in my code of ethics. I remember unprofessional behaviors in the workplace being discussed, and usually it's about drugs and alcohol, you know, which don't do that either when you're coming to work. But it is really great to see that over the years, code of ethics are reviewed and updated to fit the current climate. So Danielle's going to talk a little bit more about that in code of ethics in detail for us.
Yeah. Does anybody kind of know, or is anybody familiar, being kind of in the college and anybody familiar with what provision or ethical standard within your code of ethics, it identifies that professional relationship? If you do, kind of put that in the chat. But there are specific excerpts in each of our professional code of ethics that outline professional relationships. Within the nursing code of ethics and nursing in your provision, so provision 1, and it's in subset 1.5, it's under relationships with colleagues and others. It's specifically defined as maintaining professional and respectful, caring relationships with colleagues, and you're committed to fair treatment, integrity, preserving compromise, and the best resolution of conflicts. It even further goes on to identify disregarding the effects of one's actions on others. You will not tolerate bullying. You will not tolerate harassment, intimidation. You will not tolerate manipulation. Those are identified as unacceptable behaviors, and they're specifically outlined in your codes. In social work, ethical standard 2, specifically 2.01, it is an ethical responsibility to your colleagues, treating colleagues with respect, avoiding unwarranted negative criticism in verbal, written, and electronic communication. So unwarranted negative criticism includes demeaning comments on colleagues, their level of competence, their ethnicity, sexual orientation, age, and so on. And then in the ACA for mental health clinicians and counselors, we have a section, it's section D, and it outlines a lot of professional relationships but treating professional colleagues with dignity and respect. Professional discourse should be free of personal attacks and recognizing and respecting professional cultural differences. So all of these to say that within our professional outline, above all, regardless of where you work, right? Regardless of what organization you work for, your profession in general, what you decided to do and going into these helping, caring fields, you have an ethical and moral obligation to uphold these standards. And you have a committee in our organizations, our professional organizations, review these and they address these. And if you're not addressing these, we are held accountable to our licensing boards. And even within all of our ethical code of ethics, right? They all additionally have a statement that if we're not abiding by our ethical codes, we as professionals and observers in our community have an ethical responsibility and a moral obligation to report that. So if we have knowledge of this, failing to inform or come to a resolution, we are engaging in the act of that unethical behavior as well. We are just as guilty. In the state of Nebraska, we have a duty to report, right? So we operate as a collective. We are in that human service field, regardless of where we're at. So if we're observing this, we can't say, not my circus, not my monkeys kind of a deal, right? We have to operate in the sense of a collective. We have to take care of one another. In the Nursing Code of Ethics, it's actually provision 3.5, acting on questionable practice. In social work, it's ethical standard 2.11, unethical conduct of colleagues. And then in the ACA Code of Ethics, it's in section I, resolving ethical issues. I.2.B, reporting ethical violations. Now, all of that to say, we do work for organizations, so we do have to kind of follow that chain of command. And within all of those ethical codes, it does identify you need to make an effort to address that situation, have a conversation, take the side of attempting to work with that person, confronting that person and giving that person essentially the benefit of the doubt, educating. If that doesn't work, take it to the next level. If that doesn't work, if you're not seeing that happen, if you're not seeing that change, right, then you have the obligation to report it to the licensure board, which also indicates that we as clinicians, as professionals, as nurses, as individuals in this field, we also need to be aware that if I'm operating this way, if I'm continuing to get this feedback and I'm not changing or I'm not seeing a change, what could happen? I'm held liable and accountable, right? We need to continue to operate that way. Ultimately, we all have the same thing in mind. We want to see patient care. If we're not taking care of one another, if we're not holding one another accountable, if we're not being accountable for ourselves, we see a decline in camaraderie, we see a decline in communication, and we see a decline in patient care around the world. It all trickles down ultimately.
Yeah, very well said. And you know, there's a lot of details, obviously, and rules and regulations. And then you stop and think, okay, but what does that look like in just day-to-day practice? Okay. So I'm just curious, the unethical behavior. This is kind of a common picture that you and I may think of when we think of that unethical behavior or unprofessional behavioral, lateral violence, bullying, harassment, whatever you want to call it. Does anybody, you know, some folks want to put in the chat some specific examples of those types of behaviors that you've either seen or experienced in the workplace? I'm just kind of curious what our audience has been exposed to in regards to those unprofessional behaviors. Yes, passive aggression. I'm so glad that you said that, because sometimes people think that it's, always big and aggressive and overt. And it's always the boss to the subordinates. And that's actually not true. We're going to talk about that. So that's an excellent point.
And it's a safe space. You don't have to name any names. You don't have to do anything like that. Just like passive aggression, that's a good one.
Absolutely. Okay, I know one example I'd like to share when I was very new in my career was we were in a intensive care environment, and space is cramped, and sometimes when patients would come in, it would very common that you would set their suitcases off to the side across this one entryway. Well, unfortunately, it was blocking the route for our CEO, who was having a bad day. We're all humans. We all have emotions and life stressors that impact our behaviors. When he decided to do a kickball or a football kick to this patient's suitcase down the hallway, at first it was scared the living daylights out of me. And then afterwards I was like, ooh, that's impressive. Didn't think he had it in him. And at the time I was just like, whoa, what is his issue? He's obviously angry, so unprofessional, made everybody uncomfortable, startled the staff and the patients. I didn't think of it as being unethical at the time. But now that I know what I know, I'm like, wow, it wasn't okay. Again, we all have those bad days and life happens and things may come out of our mouths that we don't, we wish you could take back. But when you develop a pattern or of a trend, then you're accepting, you're creating, excuse me, a cultural shift for your environment. I saw Mean Girls, absolutely, that cliquey behavior, glaring, looking through windows, faces, kind of that covert action. Someone making snarky, yes, underlying comments. My personal favorite is they say something a little disrespectful and then they're like, oh, just joking. Oh, why are you offended? It's like, okay, it's wonderful when you get to a certain age, you can feel a little bit more confident in speaking out, but everybody's different. So those are excellent examples. Those are things that truly, truly happen. Oh, yes. People talking to your colleagues about you, or people talking to you about another colleague, all kinds of things. Danielle, did you have any other thoughts on the covert or the cold shoulder stuff? Because that's popular too.
So yeah, so hostile, I think probably something that we're pretty familiar with. When we think of bullying, right, we think maybe of that really overt kind of hostile yelling at somebody, right? I mean, we have this picture right here in this slide where this person is over someone and it even has a megaphone really to articulate it's very intense, it's very loud, they're angry, they're throwing things, lying to get somebody fired, making somebody suffer, right? Like just that really intense, very intentional harassment, making people feel very insecure, right? The very overt humiliating, where perhaps somebody is talking and then somebody walks in and be like silencing them, like, why are you talking? Nobody cares, right?
Right. I
And
love it. That's so
it's just
true.
very dismissive and unprofessional. And then they're like, oh, it's just a joke. Like, and everybody starts laughing. And then all of a sudden it's like, but was it?
Yeah,
Was it? It just becomes very questionable.
good points.
And then
Absolutely.
another one, just kind of even the cold shoulder where like you walk into a room and suddenly it gets real quiet. And you're like, you kind of feel a shift and you're like, what just happened? Or then everybody leaves and you're left there like, wait, I think, I showered today? right? And you're just left there like, I'm not really certain. Or like taking stuff, or like all of a sudden inviting somebody to a meeting and then leaving them off, or intentionally uninviting them, or making sure that you are talking about something, but then, oh, but you don't need to know. You just, it doesn't have anything to do with you. When clearly it's like, then why did you need to talk about it in front of me, right?
Right.
Very overt, kind of cold type of behavior.
I love those examples because it just really shows that it can present itself in a variety of different ways and a different environments and from different people, but it can sound different, look different, but it's really the same thing. It's unethical, unprofessional behavior. So try to get this next slide here.
You got it? Hey, come on,
It-
Grandma. I mean, we practiced this several times.
I know it's let's see here.
Oh, Daniel, your mic is still on.
Oh, well, I mean, she's grandma.
Okay, okay, I got it. Okay. Okay, so just for fun, just a little blip there, Danielle and I were doing a pre-planned role play. Just curious, did
Did that
anybody,
make anybody uncomfortable?
did anybody notice like, oh, that was a little weird. Nothing major, nothing egregious, but a little like,
What
and I'm
just
not
happened?
grandma. Yeah, we wanted to do that because we wanted just to show how easy these things can happen. And sometimes it's subtle, sometimes it slips out and you don't think about it. And then, you don't realize, well, how might the other person perceive what I just said or did? You know, I know someone who has a very dry sense of humor, which I find entertaining. But some other people may not appreciate that. And we all have to remember too, you talk about legalities. The definition of harassment is a part of it is the act that occurred, but the larger part of it is how the recipient perceived it. So that's something that you need to be keeping in the back of your mind when you're engaging these behaviors. It's like, you can say it was just a joke, but that doesn't excuse the behavior, and it also doesn't take you off the hook. So let's take a look about, Danielle's going to talk a little bit more about the direct and indirect. Yes, intent, exactly, Kim, the intent of the comment and then the impact that your comment had make a world of difference. So yeah, absolutely. Love it.
So with the comment that I made towards Ellen, I'm curious to know if anybody had caught it, one, or if it was just maybe if it had perked anybody's ears, or if it had made you uncomfortable. Just out of curiosity, could anybody define what type of behavior it was? Was it maybe direct or indirect? And was it overt or covert? So direct would be something that could be punching, yelling, blaming, shaming, right?
Mhm.
Indirect might be something like spreading rumors, withholding information, sabotaging.
Now we're getting lots of great comments. Indirect, picked up on it right away.
Picked up on it right away.
Caught my attention because the way it was said. I love that too.
Okay, the tone of voice, right?
Yeah.
It changed, right?
Love it.
And even my facial expressions, I don't know if anybody had seen them, or if my face was on there, but I attempted to change the way that my facial expressions had changed, because your tone and your body language change, and they speak very clearly to individuals when you are being genuine or not. And so that concept of intention and perception play a huge component in communication and how you are operating on a daily basis. So you can tell somebody, go have a nice day, right? And that means something completely different than, you know what, I really hope that you go and you have a nice day, right? The first one is not meant to mean go have a nice day. The first one is really meant to be very disrespectful, if anybody can read between the lines, because your tone and your intention are very different. But there's a difference in like immediacy and visibility. So direct, we see a lot, right? It's punching, yelling, blaming, shaming, sending those really angry messages, right? Being antagonistic, using that hostile body language, using your aggressive tone with people, kind of pushing people around with that. The indirect is like spreading rumors, pulling people aside, withholding certain information, making sure that they can see it, but it's kind of like they have to guess what's going on. But maybe they can't pinpoint something, but definitely something's going on. It almost makes people feel like, am I crazy? Right? What's going on?
We've got some really great comments in the chat that tone of voice is so important. Like you said, it's
Yeah.
not necessarily what we say, but sometimes how we say
Oh,
it.
for sure.
And I really like Lauren's comment too about when we were doing the role play, that it was somewhat demeaning and unnecessary to say. The intent was to embarrass Ellen. I love that comment. I had a mentor one time talk to me about, if you're considering, should I say something or should I not? Ask yourself, is what I'm about to say useful? If the answer is no, it probably doesn't need to be said. So I really appreciated that, because it's good to exchange feedback, and we're going to talk about that. And that's useful information. That's not the same as hurtful information. But I love that comment, Lauren. That was really good.
Yeah,
Oops.
absolutely.
The other thing I want people to understand is when it comes to unethical behaviors, it really has no boundaries. Again, an old stereotype might be, from the boss to the subordinates, but it really can be from the employee to their superior, or what a lot of HR departments are seeing more now is what they're calling lateral violence, which is peer-to-peer, colleague to colleague, or different professionals in different departments, but when they interact with one another, it's not in collaboration, or it's not in a positive spirit. So it can go a lot of different directions. So regardless of what your job title is, yes, you could be a part of unethical behavior, either the giver, the witnesser, or the receiver. So what I want to stress to people right now is that when it comes to unethical behaviors, okay, we're really talking about behaviors, according to the technical definition, that are not of high moral standard. In our culture, in our work environment, we set professional standards for clinical care, regardless of what your clinical background is. There's certain standards, right? Well, we also want to set a work culture that's of high moral standards, how we treat one another, how we support one another. Doesn't mean we always agree with one another, but we can still be supportive, collaborative, and in sync with one another and hear each other out. When you are a part of unethical behaviors, you are creating a spark to an environment of unhealthy or dysfunctional workplace relationships. If you're not a part of that behavior, that's wonderful. But if you're observing it and you allow it to continue without saying anything, you're also contributing not only to the creation of that culture, but the sustaining of that culture. So that's why it's so important, regardless of your job title, whether you're, a management position or a frontline person, you still have a voice and you still have the ability to set high standards for your workplace. And that's what we really want to encourage people to do. So some real examples I want to share again on how do you know, or what's acceptable, what's not. Okay, I've had the opportunity to work in two significantly different organizations. Both were locked facilities, both addressed mental health, drug and alcohol, and other behaviors. One environment, you could walk in and swear. Matter of fact, if you didn't drop the F-bomb every once in a while, people thought you were kind of strange, kind of weird. That was considered a norm. It was tolerated. It was passively encouraged. The senior leaders engaged in that behavior. The other staff repeated it without consequence, and the customers were accustomed to it. That was a standard that was acceptable in that environment. It was a prison. Okay, makes sense. Take the same type of service, if you will, to a religious hospital organization. You didn't ever hear the senior leaders using profanity. If they heard someone using profanity, it was immediately addressed in a caring, nurturing way, saying, hey, you may not be aware of this. I just want to give you some education. We don't do that here. They set the tone. Okay, so it's our actions and what tolerance level we set for our environment that often dictates what type of culture we're going to have. And it all starts with strong leaders. Again, not necessarily having a management title, but leaders, your peers, your veterans, your preceptors. Everybody plays a part in that by sharing your voice. When we don't create healthy, safe cultures such as that, there's a lot of consequences. Not only do you have an employee that might have hurt feelings, might be stressed out, but it impacts so much more. It impacts the individual, the organization, and the people that we're here to serve. You will see certain departments and programs where you can tell there's something going on in the culture when they have high absenteeism. Number one flag, okay? Something to take a look at. You're going to see reduced productivity, whether that's serving fewer clients, perhaps not getting charting done on time, perhaps not serving as many people as normal, or creating as much of the product they normally do. And why is that? Because they're distracted. They can't focus because their mind is elsewhere. They're thinking about perhaps the uncomfortable environment which they're in, the lateral violence they're experiencing. Those are things to look at. It is also very interesting to me that you'll see an increase in FML, injury incident reports. I used to help out with that at a hospital I used to work with. And it was very interesting that when you could actually see trends with incident reports and accidents, and then when you talk to the employees and you do like the deep root cause to find out what's going on, they weren't focused, they were distracted. Well, what were you focusing on? Where's your mind? Let's dig a little bit deeper. And it's interesting to see how much unethical behaviors really impact people that were going unnoticed. Grievances and complaints. Okay. This is obviously a negative outcome of an unhealthy environment. But on the other hand, I think it's also a good thing because you want to hear people's voices. If you don't hear of a problem, you can't address it. So we need to encourage people to voice their opinions. I always say, I love a good employee survey. It's so therapeutic. I get it all out on there. Maybe it'll be heard, maybe it'll be followed up on, I don't know, but at least I can do my part by saying something. So you will see high complaints and grievances. Something to think about. Again, I might have an employee complain about one thing. Okay, fine. I might have another employee complain about something. All right, I get it. But when you start having 3 or more or different people at different locations having the same complaint, wow, now we've got a trend. And that's what's so great about data. Data really tells a story, and it's something to pay attention to and then take action on. You'll see employee turnover. All right, biggest thing that leaders and management, myself included, we forget, it's a really good, high caliber performing staff that have the most options. So people may not be vocal about their complaints. Instead, they're just going to leave. Wouldn't it be better to hear their complaint, work on a solution, and perhaps retain that employee? And if you think about it, what's the number one complaint in healthcare today? I'm so tired. I'm overworked. I'm short of staff. Where did everybody go? Everybody disappeared during COVID. Nobody's applying for jobs. Oh my gosh. Okay. So let's be thoughtful about how we treat one another in the workplace so we can retain our coworkers. Thus, I'm actually helping myself. I'll have colleagues to share the workload. But sometimes we forget that we can be a part of the solution because sometimes we might actually be a part of the problem. And then, of course, in real severe cases, there are legal implications. Like Danielle said earlier, it's in our code of ethics. Depending on the severity of the situation, some of these things can impact your license or your career more than just your job today. When we look big picture, the APA, American Psychiatric Association, estimates that about $250 million are lost from bullying in the workplace, and 18 million days a year are lost on productivity due to unethical behaviors towards employees. So this type of culture really needs to be addressed because it's a bigger impact than just the employee and the people we serve. It really has a huge impact on a lot of different facets. So one of the things that we can do to help us avoid these pitfalls, if you will, is to address myths, because there's a lot of myths out there about unprofessional behaviors in the workplace. So let's take a look at some of these. Danielle, what do you think? You want to tackle these?
Sure.
Cool.
So in the chat, just drop in there, A, true or false? The bully is typically the one who is highest performing. So it's hard to discipline someone who brings so much to the table. What do you think? False. If you said false, you are correct. Unfortunately, research indicates that individuals who are targeted are actually the peak in top performers. Common assumption is that the bully is often the star performer. However, they're the ones that are being targeted. Bullies are driven by self-interest rather than organizational interests. So essentially, it brings your productivity down, right? And your standards down. Holding individuals accountable for poor behaviors regardless of productivity standards, demonstrating that positive performance or productivity does not excuse poor behavior. That's really what creates an unethical and psychologically unsafe workplace. So you want to make sure that you are addressing it across the board. So B, it's just one person. Everyone should be able to ignore it, take it, move on.
Mm-hmm.
Again, false. Evidence suggests that just one person in that toxic, creating that toxic bullying behavior actually negates the positive productivity of two employees. So two high achieving employees. That means for that one toxic person, you have to have 3 people, 3 employees making up the work. So we're already talking about being on the floor. You're already short-staffed. You got one bully on the floor, chances are you got more than one, but you got one. You got 3, 6, 9 people that have to make up for that 1 to 3 people. That is insane to me. So we have an ethical responsibility to one another to address this. And the last one, it happens to all newbies. You have to sink or swim. You have to develop thick skin. I mean, I've heard this, right? I think we've probably all heard this, but again, that one's false. Um, when bullying, if we take this approach, it actually creates a form of organizational hazing, and that creates that trauma experience. If we know anything about the trauma brain, and more research is evolving and developing and becoming, we're becoming more aware, and organizations are adapting their leadership approaches to trauma-informed care and working with people. If your employees are operating in that trauma brain, they're not operating. They are present, but they are not accounted for. And so we see a lot of things happening. Your clients are not being taken care of. Your patients are not being taken care of. Accidents happen. Those things that Ellen just talked about on the last slide, those mistakes and maybe med errors, and just things are happening, and more time off. And then again, we go back to that one toxic person. You have three more people on the floor to make up, right? We're drowning. We are drowning, but why? We have to be accountable. We have to take care of one another. We have a responsibility to do this. It all goes back to, why did we come? Why did we get into this field? We care, right? We care. So we have to demonstrate we care. We have to take care of one another. We have to take care of ourselves. And we have to demonstrate that in a good, positive way.
Exactly. Very well said. And so with that, let's take a look at, so what can we do about this? There's a model out there called transformational leadership, and they have 4 key interventions that they recommend to everybody. Again, you do not have to be in a management title to do this. You just simply have to have a voice and be willing to share it. So the first thing that they talk about is idealized, influence, basically role modeling. We have so many amazing preceptors and leads that really mentor and train and orientate and show new, inexperienced colleagues on a regular basis. And I so commend them for it. They role model, this is how we do things here in our work home. This is what's acceptable, what's not. We have a lot of amazing supervisors, managers, service executives that are on the floors, or they take time with their staff, or they do little observations or touch bases, as I call them. And while they're doing that, they're role modeling with their staff what they expect their staff to do, to follow. So we need to remember that also, when you're in a leadership position, that your staff are always watching you, even when you think they're not watching you. So role modeling is so simple to do and so critical. Next one, they call intellectual stimulation. Basically, let's get those brains going. Don't ever assume anything. Don't judge a book by its cover, but let's sit down and let's hear other people's voices. Here, we're fortunate, we created an advisory board with our veteran staff and some of our new employees, that we run things through them before we roll out anything new, because we want their voice. Nobody knows their job better than they do, because they're the ones doing it. Hospitals have UBCs. Get people's input, because everybody has different perspectives, and they may catch something that hadn't been thought of by the person creating a project. So stimulate those conversations and the different perspectives, and then collect that information without assuming. Individualized consideration. We have a workforce today that is amazing and very diverse, different cultures, backgrounds, generations. It's important to keep an open mind, because things do evolve and change over time. That doesn't mean that the way we've always done it has been wrong. We just know more now than we did, let's say, 30 years ago. Something I'll share here, it reminds me of something I learned a while back. is that sometimes when you're trying to improve a process or create some growth, it's a change. And change can be scary, right? And that's okay. It's not uncommon for veterans who are afraid of change to stop it or to point out all the negative things or the barriers or the problems with it. I used to call it like the crabs in the bucket theory. What happens when a little crab tries to crawl up and out of the bucket to do something new and different and to go beyond? All the other crabs at the bottom, pull them down. No, let's just stay where we're at. It's not uncommon, again, for veterans to feel that way with new hires. But what we need to know is that's not useful. It doesn't help yourself or the person or the clients we're here to serve. So with that, we need to respect everyone's uniqueness, differences, be open to change, be open to consideration, and don't be the crab in the bucket. And inspirational motivation. Inspire others to remember, what is our mission? Like, I know a lot of people say, oh, mission statements, whatever. How cheesy. But if you truly remember the mission statement, why are we here? What is our goal? Who can argue with that? Stay focused on that, take the personalities out of it, and let's get into that. You know, our mission. Let's not just talk about it, let's do it. So a couple of things, I know we're gonna wrap up on time a little bit, but we're going to talk a little bit about when we're creating a psychologically safe environment or a happy, healthy workplace or a workplace free of unethical behaviors. You know, these are some day-to-day things that we want to share that we can do that really fit into that transformational leadership model as well. But number one is exactly draw the line, set the tone, let it be known what's acceptable in your environment and what is not. You know, I've seen it, you know, when I've worked at different organizations, I've interacted with different departments, I've been on different floors in different hospitals. And sometimes you can just feel the culture. You can see what's acceptable, what's not. So that's how you know to kind of fit in. So set the tone of we support everyone. We mutually are gracious towards one another. We admit we make mistakes and it's okay. It doesn't mean we always agree, but we can hear each other out and be supportive. Again, think about what is your intention. And I love it. Kim just said also recognizing that people transition differently. They just made different time. Love that. That's so true. Exchanging feedback, critical. You cannot have a healthy culture if you're not opening up the door for feedback. I know one of the things that we do here when we have our touch bases, it's the last question I ask my people every single time. What can I do for you? What feedback do you have for me? I need to learn and grow too. And that's just so important. Again, regardless of your job title, you have to be open to that. And you have to feel comfortable giving someone feedback or a helpful suggestion or a tidbit of, hey, I noticed that you did it this way. Just thinking, if you did it a different way, it might be easier for you. It's not being critical. Your intention is to be helpful. So make sure you're exchanging feedback, removing judgments, educate people, again, on what is unethical behavior and what is not. Okay, what's the difference between a good humored joke and a comment that's insulting? There's a difference. Okay. And create opportunities for team, for people to interact with one another in a positive ways and encourage that, support that. Holding team activities, even if it's just like a committee, a luncheon, take breaks together, something, to create those relationships that bond, that will create a healthier environment. Do you have any comments on that, Danielle, or anything I've missed? I know that was a lot at the end there.
Yeah. I've just seen our team continue to grow and develop as well.
Mhm.
especially with being a remote team. And so that is really hard. And I love the fact that they are engaged and want to do that. And so it is hard. And right now it's hard across the board, especially with retention and staffing. And so wanting to even go and do something that's team building outside of work hours or during work hours or having the time to do that is hard. But finding something and connecting with someone can make the world of difference. So I would
Absolutely.
encourage it.
I love it. So where are we at now? So we've had a lot of education, some discussion, a lot in a short amount of time, obviously. But now it's time to take action. So what are we going to do? Number one, give some feedback. If there is someone on your unit that is engaging in unethical behavior, lateral violence, passive aggressive behaviors, whatnot, feel free to just privately and respectfully pull them aside and say, hey, when you do X, it results in Y. Instead, how about you do Z? Okay, giving feedback should be brief, direct, clear, but kind. Okay, you want to focus on the behavior, not the person. You may not care for that individual, that doesn't matter. Or you might like them a lot, they might be your best friend. But you're not focusing on that. Focus on the action and the behavior and address that. You know, when you kick that suitcase down the hallway, it scared a lot of people. Maybe instead, you should walk the opposite direction and cool off. Who knows? Or when you make that snide comment behind staff member Susie, you're being disrespectful and it's dragging morale down. Next time, if your comment's not useful, don't say anything. We don't do that here. We support people here. Set that tone. It's so important. Be accountable. Again, we're all human, right? We need to hold ourselves accountable for our own actions. When you're in the wrong, admit it, apologize, take responsibility, move on. The best apology you can do is to not repeat the negative behavior. That's when it's a genuine apology. So be accountable, hold your peers accountable. You know, you can't do it alone. It's a group effort. Use your resources. I feel very fortunate that I feel that we in our agency work with a lot of well-respected, very well ethical, moral leaders. I think their doors are always open. If you're not comfortable for whatever reason, go up the chain of command. It's very simple to do. We all have human resource representatives that are there to help us. And I also strongly encourage you to utilize your employee assistance program for support, especially if you're the one on the receiving end of unethical behaviors, because it could be very stressful. Excuse me. And then also take a moment, remember your code of ethics, why we entered this field in the first place. We're here to help people. And let's not forget that means helping our colleagues and peers as well as the clients that we're serving and help ourselves. So that's what I have. We have to remember that we are all in this together, and the culture in which we work is created by those that are living and working in the group. So if you want to change your culture, start with yourself and spread it out to your coworkers, because we are our culture. We set our own tone. So we can have the power and the responsibility to make it different. So I hope that helped. And Danielle, anything else you want to say in closing or?
No, I just, anybody have any questions or comments? We want to be cognizant of your time. We know it's valuable. So did anything come up throughout?
A lot of people say they really appreciate setting the tone. That's important. You bet. someone made a comment about ethical lines being drawn at work. We don't always think of it that way, but that's really what it comes down to. And this is an intro, if you will. It's a lot of information in a short amount of time, but there's a lot of wonderful resources out there. So I encourage you to continue to look at the college, your EAP programs, and there's a lot of resources out there to make things better. Kim had a really great point. Before you say something, ask yourself, is it kind? Is it true? And is it necessary that I say something? Yep. Love it.
Thank you so much, Ellen and Danielle. It was a great presentation, so much good information that we can all use. Thank you all and have a wonderful afternoon.
Thank you.
That concludes the online education. I would like to thank all of our presenters for their experience, knowledge, and expertise. Be sure to subscribe so you're up to date with all of Nebraska Methodist College's continuing education offerings. Thank you.